This is a camera that needs no introduction at all. Literally, because it's already in the title, so you already know what it is before you even open this video. But this, the camera, legendary series, the Fuji X100V, is something a bit of a cult classic, which I had no idea when I initially purchased this camera. But now that I've used it since about August, I can clearly see why. I know most of these camera overviews are going to be my quote-unquote first time being able to insert scenario with insert camera, but this is the first camera that taught me to go back to JPEG. More importantly, this is the first camera that taught me to go back and trust JPEG. For the past several years after I finally got out of editing photos off of my phone and finally had a computer to adequately edit photos on Lightroom with, I learned 3 key letters: RAW or DNG, depending on what camera it was. And from then on, the fate of any image quality rested in my hands alone. That was until I got this camera. See, I'm something of a new person to the Fujifilm ecosystem. My first camera was the XF10, which I've made a review on previously. For that camera, I shot it purely in RAW too, because of the ability of what I could do in post-processing, and I was slightly ignorant. However, as time went on and I was editing the files from that camera, I noticed one thing in the top right corner that I've never noticed in Lightroom before, and those were picture profiles. More specifically, Fujifilm picture profiles. Everything from Astia to Velvia to classic chrome, even camera monochrome with filters like red, yellow, and green. This camera, there was one thing that changed my photo editing and subsequently my JPEG shooting, and that was classic neg. This one particular film simulation really comboed beautifully with all the external controls that this camera has on it. And I can go in depth on how they've changed many things on this camera over the previous generations, like how the lens is sharper wide open at f2, how they increased the ND filter by 1 stop, or even the tilting LCD panel, or even how they upped the resolution in the EVF. None of that's my job. This camera's been reviewed many times over the year already. My job, like all the videos in the future on the series will be, is telling you how each and every one of these cameras have got me back to enjoying photography just a little bit more than previously. And for this camera in particular, there's really nothing it can't do. I know the 35mm equivalent focal length gets a lot of hate because how quote-unquote boring it is, but that's really because it can do everything, really. Some say it's just a tad bit too narrow to be a good wide-angle lens, and a bit too wide to be a standard lens, but I see no problem in either of those. What some consider mundane, I consider a challenge. A never-ending quest to make my photos seem a bit more interesting with a quote-unquote boring focal length. See, the reason I bought this camera over its nearest competition, the Ricoh GR3, is because this camera had a fixed focal length 35mm equivalent lens, and not the 28mm lens on the GR3 that I'm already used to on my previous camera, the Fujifilm X-F10. I'm already used to 28mm and all the quirks and caveats that come with that focal length. In fact, on both my digital and analog film systems, I have a 28mm lens and a 50mm lens. And although buying a 35mm lens for both those systems would have been cheaper than this camera alone, I wouldn't have made it this far in life if I did the conventional easy thing. So I decided to drop some money on this camera and see where it got me. And there's a certain beauty when the camera is built specifically around the lens itself, instead of the other way around. You're able to get better things like less diffraction, no vignette, less distortion, more contrast, and overall a sharper image in general. And along with all these perks, this camera has a built-in ND filter like I stated earlier. It's 4 stops, and the way I've been using it with this camera, I've never shot anything other than wide open with this lens. Combined with the speed of the autofocus, this camera was able to keep up in any shoot that I brought it to, making it a perfect companion for any film shoots that I had to do. See why they say this camera is a street shooter's dream. You're able to change almost all the settings when the camera's off, meaning it's very easy to capture an event as it's happening. Maybe even right before it happens too. And the way I use this camera specifically, I turn all the displays off and use the OVF strictly. I shoot for a couple of days and then I upload directly to my iPad. For all those people that are desperately trying to chase that film look on a digital camera, it's probably the closest you're ever going to get to it, honestly. At least without expanding your wallet and trying to get a Leica, which this camera's often been compared to. I chose to get this camera in all black, as most of my cameras are all black anyway. And by now I'm too lazy to change my color scheme. And beyond the photos that I've taken with it, I've gotten many compliments on how it looks. Even though, I'm not the one that designed it. You should be giving all the props to the Fujifilm design team. But I'll get them where I can. I could include the fact that this camera does 4K video too. I may even include some video samples, but that's not what I do personally, and there's an abundance of videos on YouTube already trying to balance between the photos and the videos that a camera can do, and I'm always the one that's specifically looking for what the camera can do photography wise. So to summarize that as quick as I can, it'll make a good B camera, but don't expect any smooth, stable footage unless you put a warp stabilizer in post, or have a gimbal. Just don't try to vlog with it. In a world where every other camera is trying to spread itself thin, trying to include every feature and appease every audience, Fujifilm X100V knows its place. It's the perfect little sidearm you can bring everywhere with you. While every other camera may be a rocket launcher, the X100V is a reliable pistol.